a cultural anthropologist. Is it Dizard or Desert? Am I?
Actually, it's we put the emphasis on the other syllable.
Oh, sorry.
And we say Dizard.
Dizard, okay. Cultural anthropologist who's done fieldwork all over the world, and is currently, your work addresses a California tribal conflicts with alternative resource development projects, and you're working to ensure safe drinking water for all Californians. That's wonderful work.
Thank you. You might wonder why an anthropologist with an interest in cultural resource management, natural resource management, might run across a story such as this. And I wonder too, but I met Mr. Jim Tanimoto by a happy accident, thanks to a senior colleague in our department at Chico State Anthropology, who himself was imprisoned when he was a very young boy at Arizona. He was in Poston. And people had told him, gosh, you got to meet this guy Tanimoto. And my colleague, Mark Koda, said he didn't want to. He was anxious about it. It was a part of his life he wanted to forget for some reason. And he heard me speak about Tule Lake, not just in terms of the relocation center there, but also in terms of the longer history in Native American communities, the Modoc War, the water conflicts that have been happening there, and said, well, Jesse, do you want to go with me to meet Mr. Tanimoto? And I said, well, absolutely. And that's the result.
And Mr. Tanimoto, I see that you have something prepared. Did you want to say something to the audience before we get started?
First, I would like to thank Professor Jesse Dizard for making the Tanimoto Journey DVD. This story of an American citizen of Japanese ancestry who were forced to evacuate from their homes and business and put into what was called the American concentration camp. This story should be told and retold many times so something like this can't happen again. Many or all of you have known someone interned in these American concentration camps. Your parents, your grandparents, your friends, your neighbors. This was a big black mark in the history of our American government. I am proud to have someone who cared enough to make this DVD video of an American citizen put into an American concentration camp without due process. And I want to thank Professor Jesse Dizard. Thank you very much, Jesse.
Jim, it was an honor. You're my hero. If I live half as long as you've lived, I'll be sitting pretty.
I was 19 years old when I was forced into these camps. I'm 95 years old today.
Hiroshi, I was wondering if you'd mind sharing a little bit about the Tule Lake pilgrimage that we saw up on the phone.
Well, one of the big emphasis of our pilgrimage is to clarify the idea of protest and how that plays into the Tule Lake experience, and how we had been, the survivors of Tule Lake had been vilified as bad people, as troublemakers, and stories like Jim's clarifies that Jim is a real hero, and an American hero, and that's one of the big emphases of the Tule Lake pilgrimage.
And so very fitting that it's in this segment, Americanism is in the heart, right?
Right.
I want to open it up to questions from the audience. Does anyone have questions for our panelists here today?
I'm wondering if I'm wondering if you see any parallels between what's going on today and what was taking place in 1941 and 1942 with the government we presently have.
Well, my understanding is that when 9/11 happened, the FBI visited these people what the FBI thought, and did the same thing for the Japanese after Pearl Harbor. So I think this is something that's going to be repeated, like the end of the movie says. I hope this doesn't happen again, but I personally think it's going to happen to some other minority.
Mr. Tanimoto, you're at an age now where a lot of people would just sort of forget about what happened in the past and not take the time and the energy that you've taken to inform and educate the rest of us. What made you decide after all this time to allow your story to be told?
Well, to make a long story short, I was in Montana visiting Custer's Monument, and I met a Native American there. And he was a very well-educated person, and he had a couple of PhDs, and he was a electronic engineer, and he was there selling Indian artifacts. And I asked, why are you doing here selling Indian artifacts when you could be making $100,000 on the outside? Well, he says, I'm here to tell the Indian side of the story. The Indians were not the bad guys. The bad persons were the white people that invaded our land. We were only protecting and trying to keep our land. So he says, I'm here to educate the public. And from that time on, I started thinking, maybe, just maybe, that I should start to talk about what happened to the Japanese American citizen. The public doesn't know anything about us. All they know is a paragraph or two in the school book, and that's about all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Thank you, Mr. Tanimoto, for taking your stand. I'd like to know if, one, have you ever faced any ostracism by your local community, by other Japanese Americans for the stand that you took? And for Jesse, in that area, is there a lot of acceptance? Is there a lot of knowledge about the Japanese American incarceration story? Or is there a lot of work that needs to be done?
Well, I come from a little village, little town called Gridley. We had a population before war of about just under 3,000. And I went to school in Gridley, and so I knew most of the people that lived there and went to school with their children. But when I came back, these people were different people to me. I was their friend once, and then when I came back, I was their enemy. But there was a group of people, new people, and they were conscientious objectors. And they invited us to come back. We will take care of you. So there was both sides. Some saying, stay away, and some saying, come back.
Well, thanks for your question, Kenji. And as a professor at a state university, something I'm sure you're familiar with, particularly in Northern California, the vast majority of my students never heard of the Japanese American imprisonment chapter in our history, and to the extent that any of them have heard about it, they know a little tiny bit perhaps about Manzanar because of some excellent work that had been done there, and perhaps maybe even Ansel Adams photographs, the ones that he took with the express condition that he not show barbed wire guard towers in any of his images. So he took a lot of happy pictures of shiny people playing baseball, and nothing wrong with that, but it was deliberately done to make Manzanar look a lot nicer than it was in fact. And perhaps some of you saw the film earlier set in Manzanar with some great shots from Manzanar. And Tule Lake, no one ever heard of Tule Lake, and yet, as most of you probably are no doubt aware, it was the largest of the facilities constructed for this sort of experiment in racism. And so really, to answer your question, I think a great deal of work has to be done. And we have, I mean, in a sense, there's an embarrassment of riches when it comes to that kind of work. And to be honest, I teach a course on Islam as well. And one of my assignments, I asked my students to go find a Muslim person and just talk to them. And you have no idea how large a fraction of my classes come to me after I've issued this assignment and say, "What do you mean?" And I just say, "What do you mean? What do I mean?"
Are there any other questions from the audience? Oh, okay, in the back.
Thank you so much for being here. My question is for Mr. Tanimoto. I was wondering how this decision to refuse to fill out the loyalty questionnaire came about for so many people in one block. Was it a collective decision? Did you talk about it? Or was it every individual just deciding for themselves on their own?
1943, that was the year they passed out the loyalty form. In Block 42, my block, individually, we decided that we were not going to fill out this form. We never had a meeting. We never discussed this with the group. There was 36 of us on Block 42. They're all deceased now, and you're looking at the last one.
When Jim refused to sign or to fill out the registration, Tule Lake was not a segregation center yet. So his protest and his group's protest was the first at Tule Lake. When it was known that the 36 in Block 42 would not fill out the registration questionnaire, the director of Tule Lake threatened them with the 10 years, $20,000 fine. And hearing that, they ignored it and they said, "No, we're still not filling it out." So he sent in the army with trucks and tanks and jeeps with mounted machine guns, and they arrested the 36, and they took them to jails, right, in Klamath Falls, and they were in the jail in Klamath Falls for about a week, and then the sheriffs of the jail said, "What are the charges?" The administration found out that they hadn't broken any laws. The Espionage Act was not violated, and the Selective Service Act was not violated because when the Army issued the questionnaire, it wasn't compulsory. So they couldn't keep them in the jails, and that's when they were taken to the CCC camp. And the key point of that is that the administration didn't want to admit that they had made a mistake or had done anything wrong, and they never told them that no law was broken, that they were mistaken, and they kept him for a month and they just released him.
I just wanted to add that CCC camp still stands. That's where we got that footage. for those buildings, and just about everything else at Tule Lake site itself is gone, erased, except for one notable building, and that's the jail, which still stands. And I met the man who directed the crew that built it. They were all prisoners there. There are a bunch of other buildings like it in the area because they grow a lot of potatoes up there, and that style building is really good for storing your potatoes. But all the ones built in that era are crumbling and falling apart, except the jail.
I thought maybe to close out this session, Hiroshi, would you mind just letting us know when the next pilgrimage out to Tule Lake is scheduled?
The next Tule Lake pilgrimage will be over the 4th of July weekend in 2020. And the registration forms for the pilgrimage will become available on February 19th, 2020, on our website, tulelake.org.
Well, thank you so much to everyone for being here. And thank you, Mr. Tanimoto, for